Please be seated. I open this public session of the Doctoral Examination Committee of the Faculty of Behavioral and Movement Sciences. From the Christian origins of the Vrije Amsterdam to the polychromatic academic community that we are today, our scientific practice is intertwined with fundamental values and a sense of wonder. Prior to the examination, I invite the candidate to give a brief explanation of the research on which the thesis is based. The floor is yours.
Dear Rector, dear audience, I am proud to present you today the result of my doctoral work titled Intergenerational Transmission of Education and Mental Health, Triangulation Across Genetically Informed Designs. In the past 5 years, my research has focused on understanding why some people succeed in education while others face difficulties or discontinue their studies. I aim to understand if this relates to their mental health, as people who do well in school tend to have better mental well-being. And I aim to understand how these aspects might pass from one generation to the next, as parents' education and mental health might affect their children's. To study this, I employed genetics as a tool by exploiting genetic information inferred from difference in DNA between people and difference between family members. In my first project, I looked at education and which individual characteristics impact the level of education someone achieves. One well-studied characteristic contributing to educational attainment is cognitive ability, often measured with cognitive tests. However, cognitive ability is not the only important trait. Other characteristics such as curiosity, perseverance, and self-control may also play a significant role. These characteristics are often referred to as non-cognitive skills. In my project, I investigated what these non-cognitive skills are and how they relate to other traits. To do so, I aim to identify which genetic variants are associated with non-cognitive skills, something that is called a genome-wide association study, or GWAS. There are millions of places in DNA where people differ. A GWAS looks at all these places in thousands of individuals to find out if people who have the same version of these genetic variants are more likely to show the same individual characteristics. For example, a higher education. Typically, to do a GWAS, we need to look at people for who we know both their DNA and their characteristics. This can be done and was done for education and cognitive ability, but this is more difficult for non-cognitive skills. There are potentially many types of non-cognitive skills and many ways to measure them. Because of this, we came up with a statistical trick to obtain a GWAS of non-cognitive skills. To make it simple, if all the individual characteristics that matter for education are indeed covered by cognitive and non-cognitive skills, and we know the GWAS of education and cognitive ability, then we can obtain the GWAS of non-cognitive skills by subtracting the GWAS of cognitive ability from the GWAS of educational attainment. This is what I did, so I could then use the GWAS of non-cognitive skills to investigate the nature of non-cognitive skills. With regard to biology, I found that genes associated with non-cognitive skills are specifically expressed in the brain, in neurons, in the same cell types as the genes associated with cognitive ability. Using genetic correlation, I showed that non-cognitive skills are associated with many diverse traits. Among the most interesting results, I found that non-cognitive skills are genetically correlated with less risk-taking and with a more mature personality and other socially desirable traits. However, I also found that non-cognitive skills are associated with a higher risk for several mental disorders. This suggests that individual characteristics that predispose someone to go further in school might also increase their risk to develop a mental disorder. In my second project, I continued to use this new GWAS to investigate which parental characteristic influence their children's education. Do traits related to cognitive and non-cognitive skills play a role? The key challenge here is to separate the influence of social factors from genetic factors, as parents not only shape their children's environment, they also pass on their genetic predispositions. Luckily, combining DNA and family data makes possible to isolate these two influences and tell if parents' genetics might act on the child education not only by genetic transmission, but also via the environment. To do so, I used data from 3 cohorts, from the Netherlands and from the UK. For all participants, I computed a score that summarized their genetic propensity for cognitive and non-cognitive skills. By comparing these polygenic scores between siblings, between adoptees and non-adoptees, and controlling for parents' polygenic score, I break up the relationship between the genes and environment, allowing me to isolate these effects. Across these methods, I find evidence that there is an effect of parental cognitive and non-cognitive genetics on the children's education, and that this effect goes through the environment. Additionally, this study helped us better understand these new methods. In my third project, I take a closer look at the link between education and mental health. Earlier studies indicated that people with lower level of education are more likely to experience mental health issues. With this study, I investigated if this association reflects a causal effect of education. In other words, if we change a person's education, could it also change their risk of developing mental health issues? To test for a plausible causal link, I used 2 different methods, one based on familial relationship and one on DNA. The first method is called the sibling design. I was able to use educational and medical data on everyone in the Netherlands, so I could look if siblings who have a higher education also have less psychiatric problems. Comparing siblings has a unique advantage. If we discover an association, we can be confident that it's not influenced by factors shared by the siblings, such as growing up in a bad neighborhood or having rich parents. The second method is called Mendelian randomization. It tests for causality by using the fact that which version of a genes you inherit from your parents is random. Using these 2 methods, I found that 1 additional year of education is lowering the chances of being diagnosed with depression, PTSD, alcohol abuse, ADHD, and anxiety. Because I use these 2 methods, which give us both the same result, we can be more certain about this result. However, the 2 methods show divergent results for other diagnoses. The sibling design suggests that 1 additional year of education lowers the risk of being diagnosed with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, OCD, and anorexia, while Mendelian randomization suggests there is no effect or even that educational attainment is increasing this risk. This shows why it's a good idea to use different methods, as we might have jumped to conclusions too quickly if we only had used 1. So now we need to look further into how education and these disorders are connected, which might be more complicated than we thought. In my last project, I wondered if parental mental health might affect the educational success of their children. Again, I used the sibling design here, but now I looked at the outcome of their children. So I looked if the sibling with worse mental health is more likely to have children who do poorly in school. I analyzed data from families in Norway whose parents had filled out longitudinal survey about their mental health and whose children passed the national test taken at 10 years old. Our results suggest that parental symptoms for anxiety, depression, ADHD, eating disorder, and alcohol abuse are not affecting the children's test scores. While of course addressing mental health concerns in parents is important, these results suggest that improving parental mental health alone will not result in better education outcome for their children in Norway. To summarize, I showed that parental characteristics associated with cognitive and non-cognitive skills likely affect their children's education, while their mental health symptoms do not. Additionally, there seemed to be a causal relationship between educational attainment and some mental disorders. Crucially, with these studies, I showed the importance of considering genetics when studying the intergenerational transmission of individual characteristics, and I showed the possibilities offered by using genetics as a tool. Additionally, my results highlight the importance of comparing different methods to study the same research questions. My work has been made possible by several founders, by many participants, and many colleagues. I would like to thank everyone for their contribution, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. May I hear if the candidate is prepared to defend the thesis?
Rector, on your authority and as authorized by the College of Deans and in accordance with the Doctoral Examination Committee in the Faculty of Behavioral and Movement Science, I am prepared to defend my thesis entitled Intergenerational Transmission of Education and Mental Health, Triangulation Across Genetically Informed Design, in order to obtain the degree of Doctor of Philosophy.
Thank you. I invite colleague Herman, Professor Herman van der Werfhorst, Professor of Sociology at the University of Amsterdam and the European University Institute in Florence to pose the question. Please don't forget to press that. Thank you.
On the authority of the rector, and by virtue of my right, I would like to start this deliberation. Dear candidate, I really enjoyed reading your thesis. It was an interesting piece of work for me as a sociologist to read. And this is a field, the sociodynamics of stratification or inequality, and you expand also clearly on mental health issues, of course, studying them, is a field that is more and more connecting sociology and psychology, or the genetics of psychology. And I think this is a really exciting field. It's very fast, very innovative. Steps are going very fast as a field. And it's hard for me as a non-specialist in this field to keep up with the steps that are taken. But I think it's really an exciting field. And it's nice to see that you not only have written a thesis that is interesting to me, but you even attended the sociology conference last year, where I saw your work presented. So that clearly illustrates that you also see the necessity to link with different fields. So that's all very, very nice. In particular, what I really like is that you, in your study, look at the same question with different methods. You just mentioned it. I think that's really a strength of what you do. It's a pure Popperian perspective, and we should cherish that more in science. And I really think that is a great way to look at things. So I will have a question on one of your chapters in which you use one method besides many others. So in that sense, it's only about that one method. But it is a method that is used more often in the field, as far as I understand. And I think it is a problematic method, which is the instrumental variables approach to studying the role of education, in this case, for mental health issues. So the point is that with GWAS, there's, let's say, a whole genetic mix that we don't really know what's in there, right? That's the whole essence of that method. That is used as an instrument of education to assess the causal effect of education. Namely, you estimate the effect of education to the extent that it is predicted by those GWAS or PGS scores. Well, if it is such a genetic mix that we don't really know what's in that genetic mix, it is very unlikely that that instrument, let's say, only affects education and not directly mental health outcomes. But it's an assumption of instrumental variables regression that the instrument only affects the outcome through the instrumented variable. And that can't be true, essentially, because of the GWAS as a big bundle of all kinds of genes. So I would like to hear your view on this method in relation to your findings, but also in relation to the broader development in the field with regard to this method.
Learned opponent, thank you very much for your compliments, and I am indeed very happy to integrate more sociology in my work and to learn more about what I could learn from this field. Regarding your question about the instrumental variable method, so the Mendelian randomization method, I agree with you. The instruments that we use in MR are associated with EA, with education, and these are broad. We don't really know what they are and how close they are from being causal. Or whether the field of MR is very active in trying to lead to statistical methods to try to decipher if there is these assumption could be, if this assumption is valid or not. And I believe that we should be careful in concluding, especially using EA and mental health and other outcomes that are maybe less direct than smoking or lung cancer. But I do think that these are interesting methods to look at, and additionally using these MR Egger or weighted median or all these other additional methods that could relax a bit these assumptions. So I think we should not discard this method altogether. We should still use it with other methods to be sure that we are true, or what we conclude is correct. But yeah, I think it's a bit too quick to throw it away.
But do you agree that genetic mix is quite likely to also directly affect mental health, independent of education? I mean, we don't know, right? Yeah. The whole idea is that we don't really know what's in the genetic mix. So
well, we don't really know. We can have a look. We can study which SNPs and exactly or they are affecting mental health and how close they are yeah, what is the pleiotropy of all these individual instrumental variants? I think it is likely that some of them are gonna be affecting mental health through another path. Yeah, so I think the best thing we can do is supplementary analysis to look at these, yeah, and looking in the other direction. So mental health to education attainment, yeah.
Thank you. We'll continue the opposition with Professor Dykstra, Professor of Empirical Sociology, Department of Sociology, Erasmus Universiteit Rotterdam, and the Scientific Director of Odyssey, the Open Data Infrastructure for Social Sciences and Economic Innovations in the Netherlands. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Rector. On the authority of the Rector and by virtue of my right, dear candidate, congratulations on successfully completing a well-written dissertation on the genetic basis of a classic topic in sociology, the intergenerational transmission of inequality. The methods you employed follow the gold standard, the combination of measured genotypes and family-based study designs. Well done. I would like you to go beyond your dissertation in the direction of future research. You put a lot of effort into establishing genetic influences. Increasingly, however, and you cite some of them studies, the studies are showing that the role of genetic factors in education and mental health vary between societies and can change over time. Some of these studies use large multinational twin databases to analyze country-level variation. Others use polygenic scores for different birth cohorts to analyze differences across time. The importance of such studies, in my view, is that they provide insights into how governments might compensate for genetic bad luck through targeted interventions, policies, and so forth. In Chapter 4, you carried out within SIBSIP analyses using data from Statistics Netherlands for people born between 1965 and 1985. I was wondering whether those data offer opportunities to examine whether the influence of genetics varies across time. That was my first question. In your conclusion, you refer to the exciting opportunities offered by recent data infrastructures such as Odyssey, and the Rector referred to it. That's the Dutch infrastructure for the social sciences. And I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Trugvia, for cross-border genetic biomedical research. Do those exciting opportunities include research on variations in genetic influence across countries and across time? If they do not, what suggestions do you have for the leadership of Odyssey or the leadership of Trugvia? I'm eager to hear your reflections.
Learned opponent. Thank you very much for the compliments on my thesis and these questions. To answer your first questions about, if I remember, if the sibling design could help us understand if genetics effect vary across times.
It was the fact that you have quite a few birth cohorts there, and that's what.
Yeah.
Would that be possible?
Yeah, I think it would be possible to look across birth cohort. One of the issue I would see is changes in the way mental health is being defined across time, which makes it harder to know like the genetic effect on the underlying symptoms or issues. For example, in 2014, there was a change in the way or like how many patients would get care from the first line care. So this made a huge impact. So this is all things to keep in mind when doing this kind of analysis. Yeah, so definitely, I think we could do this, and we should probably do this in the future. Regarding the question on if the Odyssey and Trygve are looking at variation across countries and across times, I'm not so sure. I'm sure some researcher will look at this. I think Trygve is the idea of this is to make it easier for the Scandinavian countries and Denmark, maybe Estonia, I don't remember who is in there, to collaborate more easily, and also with genetic data, which is often one of the data that is the most difficult to access. So I expect that some collaboration and interesting papers will come out from this. For Odyssey, this is more focused on the Netherlands now, which I think makes sense. We need first to have a unified data and like something that works in the Netherlands before to collaborate more easily with the other country. For the suggestion for leadership, I think maybe talk more with each other. So I have the feeling that a lot of these countries using population registry are struggling with the same issues of how do we look genetic data and how do we make it possible and who has access to what. And so maybe there's more learning from each other of how do we solve some of these issues. I would probably focus on building some pipelines so that collaboration is easier, and data information. So the CBS data, everything is in Dutch, which is okay. If it would be easier to copy paste and translate, that would be nice. Same for Scandinavian population registry, where sometimes information about the data is difficult to access, which makes collaboration very difficult.
Mr. Rector, may I follow up?
Please do.
Thank you for your suggestions for the leadership. Just one point. In the meantime, all of the data, the metadata statistics Netherlands have been translated into English.
Nice.
To enable non-Dutch speakers in the Netherlands, but particularly also researchers in other countries to make use of Statistics Netherlands data. And your point of creating pipelines is well taken. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. I invite colleague Hans van Kippersluis, Professor of Applied Economics, the Erasmus Universiteit Rotterdam and the Erasmus School of Economics, to continue the opposition. Thank you very much for coming and for improvising this Zoom meeting.
On the authority of the rector and by virtue of my right, dear candidates, let me also congratulate you on an excellent thesis, and let me also apologize for not being physically there. In fact, I am in Amsterdam, but I was stuck in the train for too long to make it on time. But I hope to congratulate you later at lunch. So let me first compliment you again on your excellent thesis. I think it's a very nice combination of data and methods. And what I really like about the thesis is sort of the triangulation across methods, both across chapters, but also within chapters. And I think that's definitely deserves a compliment. I want to go back to chapter 4, and my question relates somewhat to the question by colleague van der Werfhorst. So in chapter 4, you also use sort of different designs. You use a within family design, comparing siblings, and you also use Mendelian randomization. And these methods rely on slightly different assumptions. And so given that you find relatively consistent result, I think that provides some more convincing evidence that indeed we were talking about causal effect here. And I also applaud the use of this within family Mendelian randomization, because I feel that it is also very, takes away many of my worries about SNPs being reflecting other things. But let me challenge you a little bit on an alternative storyline. And I would like you to reflect, let's say, on whether my alternative storyline could be challenged by either one of the methods or by the combination of these methods. And the storyline is that what if there's simply an effect of certain non-cognitive skills that you also study in chapter 2, for example, on mental health? So let's take emotional stability or something like that. So what if there's a causal effect of emotional stability on mental health? Would any of your methods, or perhaps again the combination of the two, rule out this specific method, even if there's no effect of education itself on mental health?
Learned opponent. Yeah, I hope you will be joining us at lunch. Sorry to hear about the delay. Thank you for your question. So if I understand correctly, you are wondering if we could look at the effect of non-cognitive skills on mental health and if that would help us understand the effect of education attainment?
Yes, but maybe more specifically, like what if there is no causal effect of educational mental health, but there is an effect of non-cognitive skills like emotional stability on mental health? Would your designs, let's say, not also pick up this effect of emotional stability on mental health?
If education attainment is not linked with emotional stability, then I don't think we will then see it in this Mendelian randomization results. What we could have a look at, and I'm actually doing it right now, is doing Mendelian randomization with cognitive and non-cognitive skills GWAS on mental health. So this would tell us a bit more which of these two aspects of education attainment have a role in mental health. And as you expect, it depends per disorders. Yeah, I think this is the way to go. There's different Mendelian randomization methods that we could use, controlling for each other, controlling for education. Some colleagues actually have done this for Alzheimer, and they could see that only cognitive aspects is causally associated with Alzheimer, and non-cognitive aspects of education are not associated with Alzheimer. So we could do something similar for all other disorders.
I see, but in practice, we know that emotional stability and other non-cognitive skills are related to education, right? So, I mean, I guess I wanted to circle back again to the question of the Professor van Werfhorst, is that aren't you sort of measuring with both of these methods, more like something like the causal effect of genetic liability to education rather than the effect of education itself on mental health? And could all of the effect that you find be explained by, for example, things like non-cognitive skills or cognitive skills?
Yes, we do look, so this Mendelian randomization, the interpretation of the result is only relating to the genetic liability and not really the effect of education per se. If the genetic liability of emotional stability is related to the genetic liability of education, then indeed we can pick it up from this result. But if it's not, then we will not see it. I'm not sure if I get the point of yes. Okay.
No, that's fine. Yeah. And then maybe a final question to sort of follow up on sort of your current work, also studying sort of non-cognitive skills and mental health. How much daylight is there actually between certain personality traits and mental health? Because I could imagine that there's maybe a very thin line psychologically between emotional stability and certain mental health disorders. So could there be some kind of a biological pleiotropy between the two? And if so, how would that affect your follow-up research?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I'm also wondering about this often. How do we define mental health and some of the mental health issues like neuroticism, which is also a commonly told personality traits. I guess mental health issues are usually seen as the extreme of a lot of these personality traits. So we can see it this way. The problem about pleiotropy for this, I'm not sure. I think in a way genetics there is quite interesting because it can really help us try to understand what is the difference. So we could imagine different models with genomics to try to separate these different aspects. And I know the GWAS of personality is coming up with specifically focus on items, so specific questions. And I wish we would have like GWAS of specific symptoms of mental health, and then we could have a really deeper look of what are the shared aspect and the isolate aspect of these two phenotypes.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. I now invite a colleague, Danielle Posthuma, University Research Chair Professor at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam and the head of the Department of Complex Trait Genetics at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. On the authority of the rector and by virtue of my right, I would also like to discuss your thesis with you. And I, of course, like to congratulate you and your team of supervisors. It's really, it was a pleasure to read this. And I was very pleased to see that you used really state-of-the-art methods in our field. And you did not only apply them, but you also nicely explained the rationale of why these methods were perfectly aligned with the kind of hypothesis that you wanted to test, and also how to interpret the results. So I was very pleased to read that. I do have a couple of questions, and I focused a little bit on your chapter 4. So I'm very interested in the methods that you used in that chapter. One of the questions I have is on page, I think, 83 and 84, you already outline the 3 major assumptions of the Mendelian randomization approach. And these assumptions are quite big assumptions. So for example, the second assumption already states, there's actually page 84, already states that the variants that are related to mental health are only have their effect on educational success. So that means that you already assume the absence of horizontal pleiotropy, and that's one of the things, one of the direction of causations that you might also be interested in knowing. So I was wondering whether you tested whether these assumptions were met, or whether you have any other reason to believe that in your design and the data that you're using, these assumptions are probably valid. So yeah, please can you expand on that?
Learned upon it. Thank you very much for your compliments and for your question. So this question relates again to the 2 other questions about the assumption that the SNPs or the instrument variants are not associated via another way to mental health. So there are a few ways to kind of test. There's a way of testing for directional pleiotropy, which would be basically means that there is an effect via another pathway than through education. These effects were not there, or it looked like there is no directional pleiotropy for most of the traits, or whether this is relying on a lot of power. So I would still be a bit careful in saying there is no directional pleiotropy. Then we can use methods that relax a bit these assumptions. And again, these methods are relying on much more power. So we can only be, it gives us an idea if we would expect result to be different or not. And for all of these sensitivity analysis, we find results that are consistent with the main Mendelian randomization analysis. So it seems like there's maybe no strong issues with this. Yeah, I think I would maybe still be, if the paper would only be about Mendelian randomization, then I would be very careful or in saying that there is indeed a causal association that is from education to mental health and not the other way around, for example. Mm-hmm. I'm sometimes thinking maybe one of the bigger issues is actually how the GWAS are done for mental health and education, which are done in samples that are often a bit biased as well. So I don't know. I wonder if pleiotropy might be overstated and some other issues might be bigger. But yeah, I think the most we can do is using different methods, using newer Mendelian randomization methods when possible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And just one small follow-up question on this. So would you think that these assumptions generally apply to all of the SNPs involved in polygenic traits, or would you would you assume that these assumptions can be differently met for different SNPs?
Oh yeah, definitely. Different SNPs can meet some of the assumptions, some not, and separating the variance into the. So we could try to separate the variance of education attainment into SNPs that meet the assumption and SNPs that don't meet the assumptions. Leave one out. Look at every SNP differently. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Then I think I have time for another short question. So you mentioned on page 85 that in the data that you use, that you observe that the genetic correlations are quite substantial, but that doesn't always follow the same pattern as you have seen on a phenotypic level. Could you maybe speculate on why you think this might be the case?
Yes. Well, it could be the case for, I guess, true biological difference in these disorders and then the way they express themselves. It could be that the genetic liability is not the same as how you show a symptom. So if we imagine the genetic liability being a normal distribution and being diagnosed being only the extreme case of this normal distribution, maybe these two aspects have different correlations. So that would lead to this pattern. The genetic correlations are done in international samples. So there could be that the Dutch sample is specific for some things. For example, schizophrenia is usually not associated phenotypically with other disorders because when you diagnose someone with schizophrenia, it's rare that you, or I think it's even not possible to say this person also has bipolar disorder. Well, of course, the underlying genetic liability might be closer. Yeah, these are some of the possibilities for this mismatch.
Okay, thank you very much. Do I have time for one more question?
Yes, we have plenty of time. Please go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things I was very interested in, so you've worked with these different designs and all of these different beautiful data sets, but you also mentioned some of the limitations of both of these. So if you could think about the most optimal design and the most optimal data set, what would that be?
Interesting question. I don't believe there is an optimal design. I really think we need different designs to be able to cover a different angle and be sure that we have different, that bias are going into different direction, let's say, from these designs. So I would probably go with national registry data, which has family relationships, so we know who are the siblings and maybe also the cousins, so we can also include them in this model. And with the same data, having genetic data where we can do within family Mendelian randomization or other within family polygenic scores to test other assumptions. Ideally in the same sample, which is of course a bit difficult at the moment.
Okay, then my final question is based on the results that you found in your chapter 4. What would be your recommendation for society if the goal is to prevent or maybe to cure mental health?
I would refrain from saying any recommendation because it's only one study, so it's difficult to conclude anything on this. Then we looked at education attainment in the Netherlands, but education attainment is not the only thing related to education that might affect mental health. So it would really require some evidence synthesis review of the field to really look at what other aspect of education might matter when we make policy changes and or reform in the educational system. And then we still don't know. So it looks like higher education is causally decreasing depression and some other disorders, but it might also increase some of the others. So I would wait to know a bit more before to go on.
Okay, that sounds very clever. Well, I would thanks for your answer, and I would like to give the floor back to the rector.
Thank you very much. This is turning out to be a wonderfully efficient exchange, so I imagine there may be time at the end for additional questions. So if anything occurs to you along the way, please bear it in mind. I hope to be, we may have time. We'll continue the opposition with Dr. Laura Wesseldijk, Assistant Professor at the Department of Psychiatry of the University Medical Center, and Assistant Professor at the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics in Frankfurt. Please go ahead.
On authority of the rector and by virtue of my right, dear candidate, I would also like to congratulate you on this very comprehensive, interesting and beautiful thesis. It's been a real pleasure to read your insightful articles in which you thoroughly examine the relationship between education and mental health and their intergenerational transmission. You have made a very clear case for why we should not limit ourselves to only one research design and the importance of triangulation. And I am very impressed by the diverse methodologies you've employed, the innovation of a novel method, but also your efforts to have everything pre-registered and open access. It's truly a great example of good science. And these compliments, of course, are also for your co-promoters and your promoter. Of course, I also have some questions for you, and I would like to start to talk with you about Chapter 5. In Chapter 5, you examine whether parental mental health is potentially causally associated with children's academic achievement, making use of the within family model to control for familial confounding. And you find that although children tend to score slightly lower on math and reading if their parents have more symptoms of anxiety, depression, and eating disorder, once you control for familial factors, the association disappears. And this contradicts the idea of a causal pathway. So this must mean that there are familial factors evoking this association between parental mental health and childhood academic achievement. And could you say something about whether you maybe expect horizontal genetic pleiotropy, or if you had specific familial factors in mind that might be at play here?
Learned opponent, thank you very much for your compliments and for this question. So indeed, the fact that the within sibling design found no effect suggests that the observational association we see is due to shared characteristics of the siblings, which could be part of their genetics or could be the shared familial environment. If I would speculate, I would probably go on with some of the shared familial environments, so living in poverty, some, the neighborhood, it's kind of all like cultural habits. So this would be, I think, where I would look further. For genetics, I think in a way, if we believe these results to be exact, I would think genetic is not there because siblings only share 50% of their genetics. So we would expect to still see a bit of effect if there would be an effect of genetics.
Okay, a follow-up question. I believe that this design does not rule out reverse causation. And though you measure parental mental health in pregnancy and closer to the measure of childhood academic achievement, and the results seem quite similar, do you have any thoughts on whether it could also be the case that the child's academic achievement influences parental mental health instead?
Yeah, so that's a great comment on the within sibling design, which doesn't give us any information on the direction of causation. I think it's very unlikely here. Well, first, there is no effect, so I would not expect an effect of child education on the parents. I think it is possible via other ways of child personality affecting the parents, and definitely is an option.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, then I was also wondering in the introduction, you mentioned that there are factors that haven't been taken into account, like parental gender. And I was wondering if you looked at differences between paternal or maternal psychopathology on childhood academic achievement.
Yeah, I did. There's no real difference between the two.
It
No.
doesn't.
I think it's a general pattern in all my chapters. Yeah.
Then I have another question about a different chapter. It's about chapter 3, in which you make use of polygenic scores. And on page 57, you calculate sibling polygenic score correlations, which are slightly higher than 0.50. And therefore you conclude the presence of assortative mating. Though I am wondering whether this inflation could not be due to population stratification, because in the educational attainment GWAS of OCPI, they also found inflated mate pair correlations, and they actually did some follow-up studies and saw that actually a lot was contributed to population stratification. And I just wanted to hear your opinion, what do you think of the method of using a correlation between polygenic scores to estimate assortative mating?
What do I think about this method? I think it's basically one of the only one we have, so it's a bit difficult to judge. It is not ideal. I don't know about this paper, so I guess it could be maybe population stratification, and we do suggest that there is a bit of population stratification in the polygenic score for non-cog. I don't remember. I thought I remembered that the sibling correlations was higher for cognitive skills than non-cognitive skills, so that would kind of go in the other direction than what we find for population stratification. Yeah, I think looking at other ways for associative mating and keeping it in mind when we do the studies is the best. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll continue this session with Dr. Niels van den Berg, postdoctoral research associate at Leiden University Medical Center and at the Department of Biological Psychology at the Vrije Universiteit. Please go ahead.
On the authority of the rector and by virtue of my right, dear candidate, of course, for me also, congratulations with this very nice dissertation. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, especially the triangulation that you applied indeed within the chapters and between the chapters, but also the good discussion, and especially that it was very well written, I think. It was very accessible to any background, I would say. So basically, for me, you can, of course, expect a question about longevity. And you touch upon that a little bit in chapter 2. Chapter 2 on page 27. And I hope to discuss with you the link to chronic diseases here a bit. So step away a little bit from the mental diseases. So basically, in the second paragraph, you write that cognitive skills and non-cognitive skills are genetically correlated with parental lifespan. And actually, in the next sentence, you call it longevity. So my first question was, how do you see the connection between parental lifespan and longevity? Is that the same concept, or what is your opinion on that? Because longevity is, I would say, not a well-defined term.
Learned upon it. Thank you for your compliments on my thesis and for this question. I call it longevity. I think that's what the GWAS that I used called it, because it's difficult to do a GWAS on how long people live. So they used a proxy, which is how long did your parents live to? So that's the only reason why I use this term. I don't really know if this is a good definition of longevity. So, yeah.
I would say any definition is fine as long as you can explain what it means. So in that sense, I had a follow-up question. So you use a paper indeed from Timmers, it's 2019. And I can remember that in that year, there were multiple papers on longevity, also multiple GWAS papers. So I was wondering, did you have, when you were reading literature, was this a specific pick for the Timmers paper, or did you consider other literature to represent longevity?
I cannot remember. So we selected the GWAS based on which trait we think would be associated with non-cognitive skills, and then on the power of the GWAS, so the irritability Z score. So it could be that the other GWAS were not, the irritability is too low for us to reuse in genetic correlation safely. Yeah, I would think that is the main criteria we used. And I mean, I knew this GWAS from maybe it was just a pick. I picked one. It's possible.
And it could be.
Yeah.
Okay, so to follow up on that, can you then maybe still recall what kind of SNPs they found? What phenotypes did it associate with? Because longevity is like it's a big container. Okay, so maybe I can introduce it a little bit, because when I reread it, I found it was very interesting that they made a link. So they mainly found SNPs associated to chronic diseases, and then specifically Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease. So my question to you would be now, can you make the connection in terms of biological mechanisms, but maybe also the social mechanisms from cognitive and non-cognitive skills associated to education in relation to Alzheimer's disease and cardiovascular diseases?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So we found the genetic correlation of longevity being positively associated with cognitive and non-cognitive skills, a bit more with non-cognitive skills. I'm not sure if the difference was significant.
Yeah,
No, it was not. So more or less the same for cognitive and non-cognitive skills. I think it's interesting in relation to this other paper I mentioned with Alzheimer that found it's only cognitive skills that are associated or causally associated with Alzheimer's and not non-cognitive skills. So this maybe taps into the difference between longevity and Alzheimer not being exactly the same. So that we could imagine that the cognitive skills affects Alzheimer, which affects longevity, and the non-cognitive skills affect longevity via another way. For chronic diseases, I could think of it affects lifestyle choices linked to non-cognitive factors or cognitive factors or other. Actually, there's another interesting paper that used the cognitive and non-cognitive skills GWAS that we did that looked into they call this meta-loci, which is basically loci associated with mental health disorders. And they found for cognitive skills, one important one was associated with anorexia was metabolic, SNP associated with metabolic phenotype. So that could be a way also linked with chronic disorders, but yeah, I'm not, I don't know more about these phenotypes. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I think I was thinking in the same direction. So then maybe on this topic, a final follow-up question. Can you recall if you found SNPs? So of course, the GWAS by subtraction, you ended up with a bunch of SNPs, right? So can you recall if there were SNPs in the ApoE gene, for example? Or is that
I don't
something
think so. I think I would have remembered if this was the case. I cannot remember. That would be good to check, but I think I would have remembered.
Okay, so that would have been a direct link, a biological link from, if that's the case, it could be a direct biological link to Alzheimer's disease, for example. So, dear Rector, is there still time for a follow-up question?
Yes, we have a little bit of time. Please go ahead.
Okay, so then I have a question about the method. So the correlation between cognitive and non-cognitive skills, the genetic correlation in your method, it's fixed at 0, right? So, but when you do an expression follow-up, you see expression in brain tissue of both cognitive and non-cognitive skills. So I was wondering, do you think in reality that correlation is also 0 or not? And if it's in reality not 0, could you think of an alternative method to dive more deeply into it, I guess?
Yes. So yes, we fixed the correlation of cognitive and non-cognitive skills to 0 to be able to identify non-cognitive skills. The literature looking at actually measured non-cognitive skills shows correlation between the two. So we also have supplementary analysis where we fix the correlation to 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and it doesn't change any of the result. Like if we do again the genetic correlation, it doesn't really change anything. So I think to use non-cognitive skills as a tool, or the non-cognitive aspect of education, GWAS, it is good to consider it to be different, to be zero, but in reality, of course, reality is more complex. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, a model represents a simplified version of reality.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so then maybe the final question on this topic. I was wondering, so the non-cognitive skills, which this chapter is mainly about, it's now a container of many types of skills, I would say. And you do some phenotyping, but I was wondering, what your opinion is on future directions to dive more deeply into the specific non-cognitive skills? Could you think of a design to tease out which are more important maybe than others?
Yeah, so I think with the genetic correlation, we can already highlight some of the more important ones. So then we could focus on either collecting more data of these specific measures or using data that already exists on the specific designs, and then having a more, looking at the correlation or sibling design in these subsamples of children or adults. And then we can also control for the polygeny scores, looking at the association with these other traits. There's a lot of designs we could do to look at it further. One colleague looked in the TEDS, so the one UK cohorts now look at prediction of COG and non-COG polygeny scores across age in children. And so that's one aspect that is being done. Showing that the non-cognitive polygeny score predicts more when the children are older. Yeah.
So would you advise then cohorts to collect much more phenotypic data on the non-cognitive skills, the specific non-cognitive skills, and then do more GWAS, for example, or is that not necessary?
I think that would be the ideal to have design, like this is we had to use this trick because there is no good measure. I think it's a bit difficult still to define non-cognitive skills, and we would have to agree on some measure of non-cognitive skills. And there are some studies looking at differences, and it's not always that clear. So yeah, I think I could advise this, but we would need that all the samples are collecting the same kind of measure. I think what was interesting though is that our non-cognitive skills were never really associated with neuroticism or other measures of internalizing issues in children. And when we look at more economics literature, they tend to use this and use measures of internalizing in children and call this non-cognitive skills. So it's interesting to see that maybe actually these are not really non-cognitive skills in the way that they are not part of this group of non-cognitive aspect of education. So that's one, I think maybe would be interesting to look more into this in like the link with neuroticism, and is neuroticism actually not really affecting education at all?
Yeah, clear. Thank you for the answers.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left before this ends, so I'll return to the top of my list and invite you to pose an additional question, starting with Professor van der Werfhorst.
Thank you, Rector. I want to ask a question about the subtraction method, where basically you equate education as the sum of cognitive and non-cognitive skills. And for a sociologist, this sounds almost like panic. This can't be true. Namely, what we miss is parental agency. And you could say, okay, parental agency then would feed into those cognitive and non-cognitive skills. But I think there's also parental agency on top of what we could call skills. So that's one potential, let's say, problem that a sociologist might have with that conceptualization. And secondly, I think it assumes, your method assumes that cognitive and non-cognitive skills work additively. So, and of course, at least when it comes to parental agency, we know that there's an interaction effect between social origin and cognitive skills, predicting educational attainment, so perhaps also mental health. So can you please explain a bit about where are the parents, and does your model indeed assume an additive functioning of these two traits, and is that in line with what we know about families?
Yes, for where are the parents? So the first paper is a GWAS of individual characteristics and measures, so it's really focused on the individual. And that's in a way why we did the second paper and looking at the effect of parents there and try to use this polygeny scores as a proxy of the parental effect.
Thank you. I would now like to invite the candidate.
Know that my defense has ended. I sincerely thank the opponents for the attention they have devoted to my thesis. I now look forward to the decision of the doctoral examination committee in the Faculty of Behavioral and Movement Science, which will decide whether the degree of Doctor of Philosophy will be granted to me.
I hereby adjourn the public meeting of the Doctoral Examination Committee of the Faculty of Behavioral and Movement Sciences for further deliberation.
Please be seated. I reopen the public session by its duly accorded authority. The Doctoral Examination Committee of the Faculty of Behavioral and Movement Sciences grants the degree of Doctor of Philosophy to Perline Demange with the qualification cum laude. I invite the supervisors and the co-supervisors to place their signatures to the degree certificate as witness of this deed. Whereafter, Professor Boomsma, appointed by the College of Deans as supervisor, will perform the investiture.
By virtue of the authority invested in me by the statute of the Vrije Universiteit and as supervisor appointed thereto by the College of Deans, I hereby confer on you, Perline Demange, the degree of Doctor of Philosophy with the additional cum laude. Together with all rights, privileges and responsibilities thereto appertaining. In witness thereof, the seal of the university and signatures of the rector and the supervisors have been affixed to the diploma you are about to receive. Let me give you my warmest congratulations on this fantastic thesis, your fantastic defense, and a very enjoyable 4 years. I now give you the diploma, and the laudatio will be done by Dr. Michel Nivard.
Before so, I declare in public that in the privacy of the closed session, the candidate by signature stated adherence to the conditions laid down in the provisions of Article 5 of the doctoral regulations of this university regarding rights and responsibilities in society and science.
I once told my French teacher, Meneer Bakker, I will never need to speak French. We would call him Monsieur Boulanger, it's, you know. But I was wrong and he's right. I will now say a few words in French. And all the French people or people that speak French, please pretend that it's actually French. Chère famille et amis, je suis désolé pour mon français approximatif. Je n'ai pas fait attention au lycée. Perline est une scientifique incroyable et est toujours prêtée à aider l'autre. Nous avons chance de l'avoir connue. Durant son court séjour ici à Amsterdam, Perline est devenue une collaboratrice de confiance et une amie pour beaucoup d'entre nous. I'm sure that was even more cringe than the time Emmanuel Macron spoke Dutch. Thanks. Went better than I expected. Okay, now to some more English. Perline, in your thesis, you recalled, and you kind of stole what I was going to say first, so I'm going to say it anyway, that in our first meeting, when you were interviewed by me, and then Evelien de Zeeuw, you answered the question, what do you want this PhD to be about? I want to be a better scientist. And I laughed at the moment, but I laughed mostly because one, I knew then that I wanted to hire you. And two, I laughed at the sort of latent sort of confidence, because implying you want to be a better scientist implies you are a scientist, but you had just finished your master. So that sounded like me, like someone that sort of had the confidence to become a scientist. And what I had not realized then is how important you would become in making me a better scientist. And I can't speak for others, but I think that holds for many people you worked with and that supervised you. You never just took my word for an explanation to my exhaustion. You never took something at face value. You didn't nod along when I explained difficult stuff, which is a tendency people have. Like, I don't understand what this is about. I'm just going to nod along and look it up later. But you would not. You would tell me, I don't understand why this would work. Why would this Mendelian randomization work? And I think some of your answers today were helped by not just accepting my poor answers, but like digging deeper and finding out how it actually works or doesn't work in some cases. As you know, science can at times be harsh. The fact that projects take years to complete means they are long hours of hard work without any immediate sense of accomplishment or that sweet taste of success. And in your case, those times were also locked up in an apartment in a city far away from home. And you addressed that by making known what you needed, by changing things around you, but you weren't satisfied by just bettering the environment for yourself. You always also set in motion a process of bettering the environment for others, right? So instead of choosing the easy way and taking care of yourself, you started taking care of everyone. Now, this is a great skill as long as you also make sure to take care of yourself. You demanded a lot of yourself and worked with international collaborators who did the same. They demanded a lot of you and they demanded a lot of yourself, and you met their expectations. And I speak for them saying that you exceeded them. When you began, to realize the strain this job puts on young scholars, you also set in motion things like the PhD Council and improved help there exists for PhD students at the university. Page 2, still got time? Yes. Okay. I'm like on a very strict time limits. Sometimes scientists justifiably focus on themselves and their own needs to cope with. Well, I already had that part. Speaking of, because this rare and incredible character trait will ensure that your future collaborators can depend on you and will trust you, will confide in you, and will want to work with you. Speaking of collaborations, the first conference you visited, the BGA 2019 in Stockholm, I couldn't be at your presentation, which became a theme throughout. And I walked into the conference a day later, and you walked up to me and you said, me and Rosa Cheeseman, whom I had never heard of at the point, or maybe heard of once, are going to write a paper. It will be about this, 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 and this. Now, we've all been at conferences, been enthusiastic, so I was like, okay, sure. We'll never hear of this again. But we did hear of it again. In fact, you planned and executed the third chapter in your thesis entirely with her. And we, while providing you with help, support, and all kinds of sort of advice, we're happy to take a back seat to you and her running this project on your own. You'll now join the same group Rosa works in. I'm very curious what a reunion of you and Rosa in Oslo will bring in terms of science. I'd like to thank you for 5 years of amazing science. I would like to thank Elsje and Dorret for the constant and very effective collaborations we've had, be it through Zoom or in real life. And I'd like to thank the committee for the very evident time and effort they have put into evaluating your thesis, either from here or from Sloterdijk. And with that, I'd like to congratulate you, your loved ones, and your friends with an incredible performance.
I gladly add the congratulations of the councils of deans of the university to those delivered by the supervisor. The doctoral examinations ceremony is now completed. The Doctor of Philosophy, Perline Demange, will now lead the profession from this hall and invite you to follow. I invite you all to stand. I close this public session of the Doctoral Examination Committee of the Faculty of Behavioral and Movement Sciences. May our search for the truth and wisdom be of service to the flourishing of the world and humankind.